Picture a bowl, just a bowl. Wooden, dented, stained the colour of old bruises, never truly clean because the water used to wash it, is itself alive with things you don't want to think about. Now fill that bowl with something grey. Not grey like morning light. Grey like a drowned thing. Thick and gluey. The texture of wallpaper paste left in the rain, with a smell that arrives before the bowl does. Rancid fat and oatmeal that has been quietly rotting in a sack in the hold for 4 months because the victualling contractor who sold it to the Navy charged for good quality and delivered something that would have embarrassed a pig farmer. Add to that smell the sweat of 300 men who have not bathed since Portsmouth, the reek of bilge water sloshing somewhere below your feet, the acrid burn of tallow candles that are the only light in a space with no windows and a ceiling so low you can feel it pressing on your skull, and the particular intimate stench of men sleeping stacked in hammocks 14 inches apart, because 14 inches is the official naval allowance, and someone actually measured that with a ruler and wrote it in a regulation. That's breakfast on a Royal Navy warship in the 1740s. It has a name. They call it Burgoo. It comes from a word that means nothing good, nothing that would make you feel better about eating it. The sailors have their own name for it, and that name is not printable in polite company, but it rhymes with Burgoo and describes exactly what it looks like. This is HMS Resolute. 74 guns, 347 men and boys. Somewhere in the Atlantic, 6 weeks out of Portsmouth, heading toward a war that may or may not still be happening by the time you arrive, against an enemy you've seen on maps but never in person, under officers who consider you somewhere between cargo and livestock, slightly above the rats, slightly below the ship's cat. I make these sleep histories, and I'll be honest with you, most of the time I'm describing cities, London, Paris, ancient Rome, places with streets and markets and coffee houses where you can at least go home at the end of the day. Tonight is different. Tonight there is no going home. The sea is everywhere, and the food is unspeakable, and you're on a ship that smells like everything that ever died, and somehow, this is one of the most fascinating places a human being could have been in the 18th century. Subscribe if you want, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't think too hard about what you're eating. Here we go. Your eyes open to nothing, not the half-darkness of a room where light sneaks under a door or through a curtain, not the manageable dark of an English night in October, true nothing, the absence of any light whatsoever, a darkness so complete it presses on your open eyes like a physical weight, and for a moment, for just a moment, you can't remember which way is up. Then the ship moves. Not dramatically, not a storm roll, just the slow, constant rhythmic pitch and yaw that has been happening every second for 43 days and will keep happening until you reach land or the ship sinks, whichever comes first. Your body has learned to compensate for it while you sleep. It corrects automatically subtle adjustments in muscle and balance that happen below conscious thought, the way a sleeping rider on a horse somehow stays in the saddle. You're in your hammock on the lower gun deck of HMS Resolute. The hammock is canvas, strung between iron rings bolted to the overhead beams, and you sleep in it with your shoes on because there are 347 men on this ship, and you left your shoes in the hammock once on your first week and woke up barefoot. You were barefoot for 11 days. That particular lesson does not need to be taught twice. Now the smell arrives. It doesn't arrive like a slap. It arrives like a tide, slowly, completely, filling every passage in your head with information you would strongly prefer not to have. The lower gun deck smells like everything. Like the inside of a giant's unwashed coat. Like salt and rot and iron and wood that has been wet for so long it has forgotten what dry was. Like the breath of 300 men, each of them exhaling whatever they ate last night, which was the same grey slop you ate, same as every night, same as every morning. Beneath that, the bilge water. The bilge is the lowest part of the ship, below the orlop deck. Below the hold, basically the bottom of the hull where all the water that leaks in collects. On a wooden warship, water always leaks in. The pumps run every hour of every day, pulling it back out. But what doesn't get pumped out? The water that sits there, mixed with whatever falls through every deck above it. Rotted food and animal waste and every fluid a human body produces and a few fluids it shouldn't. That water develops its own smell over time. Ship surgeons will later argue that bilge water smell causes fever. They're not wrong, though not in the way they think. It's not the smell. It's what's in the water. But for now, in 1743, what they know is that the bilge reeks, and the men who spend too much time near it tend to get sick and die. The pump crews work in rotation, 4 men to a pump, 2 pumps per watch, dragging the ship back from swallowing itself with every stroke. You can hear them now, the rhythmic clank and suck of the pump somewhere alow, constant as a heartbeat, the ship breathing through its own rot. Your name is Thomas Briggs. You are 17 years old. You're from a village in Dorset called Wareham, which is approximately 30 miles from the coast, and might as well be 30,000 miles from anything that could have prepared you for this. You came aboard 6 weeks ago not because you wanted to. Nobody who has ever seen the Navy up close wants to join it voluntarily, at least not anyone with information about what it actually involves. But because a press gang found you on the docks at Portsmouth, where you had gone to find work on a merchant vessel, and instead found 8 men with belaying pins who were very persuasive about the differences between your plans and their plans. That was 43 days ago. In those 43 days you have learned more about human existence than in the previous 17 years combined, almost none of it pleasant. You've learned that the sea is not romantic, not from down here, not from the lower gun deck where the portholes are sealed against the weather and the only air comes from a ventilation shaft that mostly delivers the smell of whatever's stored in the hold. Not when you're pumping water for 2 hours in the dark and your arms feel like they're being unscrewed from your shoulders, and the man beside you is singing the same 3 lines of the same song over and over, because he's been at sea for 8 years and has worn down to exactly 3 lines of one song and nothing else. You've learned that the hierarchy on a ship is more rigid than anything on shore, more rigid than the social order in Wareham, which already felt like it had been carved in stone. On shore, a poor man is a poor man, but he can at least walk away. Here, the ship is the entire world, and the world is run by men with absolute authority who can, and occasionally do, order you flogged for looking at them in a way they don't care for. You've learned that the food is something, but we'll get to that. Right now, the ship is just starting to wake up. You can tell because the noises are changing, the snoring and the shifting and the unconscious murmur of sleeping men. All of that starts to layer over with more deliberate sounds. Someone coughing, the thump of feet on wet boards, a low conversation somewhere forward, the creak of hemp lines under load as the ship adjusts a sail in response to something the watch on deck has noticed. You have approximately 4 minutes before the boatswain's mate comes below with his call and his lungs, and ends any possibility of additional sleep. You know this because you have done the maths. You have done the maths every morning for 43 days, lying in your hammock in the dark, calculating the exact last possible moment before you have to move, because the hammock is the only soft thing in your world and you're not in a hurry to leave it. It's not that comfortable objectively. Canvas and rope, everything damp, rolling with the ship. The man to your left, a Welshman named Davies, who has been at sea since he was 12 and has the laugh of a drowning cat, is already awake and staring at the overhead beams with the expression of a man who left hope somewhere in the Bay of Biscay. Burgoo Day, Davies says, to no one in particular. You close your eyes, every day is Burgoo Day. That's the thing they don't tell you. When you read about the Navy, if you've read about the Navy, which most pressed men haven't, because most pressed men can't read. It sounds like adventure. Drake's Drum, Rule Britannia, Hearts of Oak, The Thundering Broadside, The Glory of England at Sea. Nobody writes poems about Burgoo. Nobody writes anything about Burgoo except the occasional complaint in a letter that never gets sent because there's no postal service in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Let me explain what Burgoo actually is, because when I tell you it's oatmeal porridge, I need you to understand what that means when you're 6 weeks out of Portsmouth on a 74 gunship in 1743. It starts in a warehouse in Portsmouth where a naval victualling contractor has a contract with the Admiralty to supply oatmeal at a fixed price. The contractor is paid whether the oatmeal is good or bad. The contractor knows, through generations of professional experience with the Navy's inspection process, exactly how far he can push the quality before someone complains loudly enough to matter. He has found that line. He operates just on the edge of it. So the oatmeal that gets loaded into the hold of HMS Resolute is the oatmeal that a mill operator couldn't sell to anyone else. It's the floor sweepings grade. The stuff that's been sitting in a warehouse since summer, and it's now October, and English summer is not a dry heat, and the warehouse had a roof that was mostly watertight, mostly. There are parts of those sacks of oatmeal that are fine. There are other parts that have developed a life of their own. Small life. Life that's visible if you look. Life that you learn, after the first week, not to look for. That oatmeal goes into the hold, 6 weeks at sea. The hold is dark and damp, and the temperature varies as the ship moves from the grey English autumn toward wherever she's going. Portuguese coast right now, maybe the Mediterranean, maybe the Caribbean eventually, maybe nowhere if a French ship finds them first. The oatmeal sits in the dark and continues becoming what it's becoming. Now the fat. The fat is called slush, or dripping, or several other names depending on what mood the cook is in when he mentions it. It's the rendered fat from the salt meat. When you boil salt beef or salt pork, and on HMS Resolute, you boil salt beef or salt pork every day the meat ration is issued, which is most days. There is fat that renders off and floats to the top of the boiling cauldron. The cook has two options. He can skim it off and dispose of it overboard, or he can keep it. He keeps it. Why? Because the slush is one of the cook's unofficial perquisites, his privileges, the things he gets to sell or use or trade because they come with the job. The slush can be sold to the men to grease their tools with, to waterproof their hats and jackets, to do any number of things that fat is useful for. It can be mixed into the oatmeal to make burgoo, which stretches the morning ration further and means the cook can skim a little extra off the top of everything, literally, and nobody can prove anything. So that fat, rendered salt meat fat, collected over days, kept in a tub near the galley fire, going slightly rancid in the heat because there is no refrigeration and the hold is not actually cold enough to preserve fat properly. That fat is the second ingredient in Burgoo. Add water. Ship's water, which has been in casks since Portsmouth and has developed its own personality. Stir over fire. Serve to 347 men in shifts, morning watch and forenoon watch, because there is only one galley and one great iron cooking range called the ship's stove, and it takes time to feed that many people, even when what you're feeding them barely qualifies as food. The result is what arrives in your wooden bowl, grey, thick, steaming, which is almost a mercy because the steam at least dilutes the smell with something that is technically just heat. And the taste. The taste is complicated. The oatmeal flavour, when present, is the closest thing to normal. It tastes like oatmeal that has been through some difficulty, gone a bit flat, a bit damp, a bit of something else that you push to the back of your mind. The fat is the main event. Rancid fat has a flavour that I can only describe to you as the opposite of butter. Butter is clean and round and mild. Rancid fat is sharp and animal and slightly sweet in the way that something decaying is sweet, which is not a sweetness you want in your breakfast. It coats the inside of your mouth. It stays there. Hours after you finish the bowl, you're still tasting the fat, and every time you burp, because the Burgoo produces burps with the regularity of a well-maintained clock, the flavour comes back. There is salt in it too. The water is already slightly salty, and the slush carries salt from the meat it was rendered from, and the cook adds more because salt is one of the few flavours that can mask the other flavours, at least partially, if you use enough of it. The Burgoo is therefore simultaneously rancid, stale, and so salty your lips feel tight after finishing it. And then there are the things that should not be in it. The small, dark, flecked things that you stopped trying to identify after your third morning aboard and now simply refer to mentally as texture. Davies, the Welshman, eats his Burgoo with his eyes closed. He says this is a meditative practice he developed on his second voyage. He's been eating Burgoo for 15 years. You believe him about the meditation. You have started doing it too. You don't close your eyes out of disgust anymore. You close them because when you close your eyes and concentrate on nothing but swallowing, the Burgoo becomes not good exactly, but manageable. An act of survival rather than eating. And survival is something you've become very focused on in the last 43 days. The boatswain's mate's call cuts through the deck. The sound is a silver whistle, high and sharp, followed by a shout that is approximately, "All hands rouse out! Lash and stow! Move your RCs, you miserable collection of God's mistakes!" The exact wording varies by mood. The intent never does. You're already moving. The hammocks come down with a practiced efficiency of 100 repetitions. Your hammock is canvas 14 inches wide. The Navy has measured this, stuffed with your one blanket and whatever you folded for a pillow, which tonight was your jacket because the temperatures are dropping as the ship pushes south, and the jacket keeps your shoulders warmer in the hammock than doing nothing, even folded. You untie the lashings at each end, pull the whole thing into a bundle and start rolling it tight. The regulation is 7 turns of the gasket. The cord that holds the hammock in a tight sausage shape. 7 turns, no more, no less. The reason for 7 turns is that 7 turns produce a hammock roll of a specific diameter that fits exactly into the netting hammers along the upper deck, where hammocks are stored during the day, and where they will stop a musket ball in a fight, which is the kind of multi-purpose thinking that the Navy genuinely is proud of. Your bedding is also your anti-personnel defence. How nautical. The problem with 7 turns at 6 in the morning in the dark while the deck is moving under your feet is that your hands are cold and clumsy and still half asleep, and the ship has just taken a small roll to port that shifted your balance. You manage 7 turns on the 3rd attempt. Davies next to you has finished his hammock and is pulling on his 2nd jacket. He has 2 jackets. He traded a tobacco ration for the 2nd one from a man who was issued 2 somehow and preferred tobacco. Davies is always cold. Davies is from somewhere in South Wales where, he says, the weather was miserable, but at least the miserable was a familiar miserable, not this particular Atlantic miserable that gets into your bones and stays there. Around you, the lower gun deck is resolving itself out of darkness. The deck is about 40 feet wide and something over 100 feet long. The guns run down both sides. 18-pound cannon on this deck, 20 of them per side, each one weighing over a ton, crouching on their wooden carriages behind sealed gun ports. Between the guns, the men are sleeping, were sleeping, in hammocks that are now coming down in a choreographed mass undressing of the space, the whole deck transforming from sleeping quarters back into gun deck with the speed that only a working warship can achieve. The ceiling, the overhead, is about 5 feet 8 inches from the deck. You are 5 feet 9. You know this because you found out the hard way, same as every man over 5 feet 8 on the lower gun deck, same as everyone on this ship has found out. You know this because there is a specific beam, the 2nd one from the gunner's storeroom, that is slightly lower than the others due to some aspect of the ship's construction that nobody has ever satisfactorily explained, and you have introduced your skull to that beam on approximately 19 separate occasions. You now duck automatically when passing it. You duck without thinking, in the dark, from memory. The deck is wet. Always. The moisture finds its way in from everywhere, from the gun ports, which leak even when sealed, from the waterway where the side of the ship meets the deck, from condensation on the cold iron of the guns. The planking is always slightly damp underfoot, which is why your shoes never fully dry out, which is why the skin of your feet is never quite right, which is why 3 men in your mess have the kind of fungal rot between their toes that you are desperately trying not to catch. But there is something else about the lower gun deck in the morning that you have come to find. Not comforting exactly, but real. The sounds of it, the low voices of men talking before full consciousness sets in. Not words, mostly, just sounds. The grunts and murmurs of bodies waking up, the creak of the ship's timber, which is constant and which you no longer hear unless it changes in a way that means something. The slosh of bilge water in the depth below, the distant rush of water along the outside of the hull, the whole Atlantic pressing against those few inches of oak, and somehow the oak holding. Wareham feels very far away. Your mother's kitchen feels like something you read about in a book. His name is Jeremiah Hobbs, and he has been the cook of HMS Resolute for 6 years, and before that he was the cook of HMS Dreadnought for 4 years, and before that he was a sailor who lost 2 fingers to a cannon accident during a fight off Cape Finisterre, and was reassigned to the galley because a man who can't grip a line properly can still hold a ladle. Hobbs is 52 years old. He's built like a barrel that has been slightly sat on. He has a face the colour of old mahogany, permanently stained by decades of sea air and galley smoke. His hair is entirely gone on top and entirely grey on the sides. His remaining 8 fingers are thick as sausages and move with surprising delicacy when he's working. He's been awake since before the watch changed at 4 in the morning. The ship's stove, the great iron firebox that is the heart of the galley on the lower deck, forward near the bow, requires a specific sequence to light. The kindling, carefully preserved in a dryish box. The flint, the slow building of heat in the iron box before you can load the heavier fuel. Everything on a wooden ship is done with awareness that you're sitting on 40 years of seasoned timber that has been treated with tar and is sitting in an ocean of wind, and you are, right now, making fire inside it. The Navy has very strict rules about fire. The stove goes out at night, every night, by order, no exceptions. The last thing done before the night watch sets is banking the galley fire and verifying it is out. Every morning Hobbs relights it from scratch, which takes about 45 minutes to get to cooking temperature, which is why you will not eat breakfast until the forenoon watch, and why everyone on this ship is slightly hungry all the time, because the gap between last meal and first meal is something like 14 hours when the stove is considered. The galley is about 12 feet by 8 feet. In that space there is the great stove, the tubs of water, the storage for whatever is being cooked that day. Hobbs, his assistant, a 12-year-old boy named William Sly, who came aboard voluntarily because his family couldn't feed him, and who is already, after 6 weeks, developing the 1,000-yard stare of a career sailor, and at certain points of the day a queue of mess cooks stretching back through the gun deck. Hobbs makes Burgoo the way he makes everything, with the impassive efficiency of a man who has been doing this for 20 years and has made peace with every part of it. The oatmeal goes into the great pot, 20 gallons, because you are feeding shifts of 70 or 80 men at a time. Cold water. The slush, which lives in a wooden tub with a lid that does not fit quite properly, added by the ladleful. Hobbs doesn't measure. He is calibrated by eye and experience and the approximate volume of complaints that result from the ratio being off. Too little fat and the oatmeal is too stiff, and the men complain about hunger. Too much fat, and the men can't keep it down and complain about being sick. There is a sweet spot. Hobbs can find it while carrying on a conversation and not looking at what he's doing. He stirs. He doesn't stir the way you'd stir porridge at home. He stirs with a massive wooden paddle, something between a canoe paddle and a cricket bat, dragging it through 20 gallons of thickening grey oatmeal with both arms, keeping the bottom clear so it doesn't scorch on the iron plate. The smell rises immediately. It rises and spreads through the forward part of the ship, down through the hold ventilation, up through the hatches to the upper deck. A specific smell that every man on the ship recognizes as completely distinct from any other smell on the ship. Which is saying something, because the ship has many, many smells. Young William Sly stands by the bread room, where the biscuit is kept, and doesn't appear to smell anything anymore. That's what 6 weeks does. Your nose eventually decides it has provided all the information it has to offer on this subject and stops trying. You, 43 days in, are still trying. You sit down at your mess. The mess system is how the Navy manages the impossible problem of feeding 347 men in a space roughly the size of a tennis court. Each mess is 8 men. You're in number 12 mess, which occupies a stretch of lower gun deck between the 4th and 5th guns on the larboard side. The mess table is a plank, suspended by ropes from the overhead beam, folded up during the day and dropped for meals. The benches on either side are the same. Everything hinges and folds because there is no space that doesn't serve multiple purposes. This plank is your dining table. In action, you'll clear it in 30 seconds to run out the guns on either side. The 8 men of number 12 Mess Davies, who you already know, Welsh, has been at sea since he was 12, has the kind of absolute sea competence that is almost supernatural. He can look at a rigging configuration and tell you in 30 seconds what's wrong with it, can feel a change in the wind before the watch on deck calls it, navigates the deck in complete darkness without bumping into anything ever. Occasionally says things that are funny, mostly says nothing. Callum O'Brien from Cork, who has been in the Navy for 3 years and refers to this as 3 years of being slowly murdered by porridge. He's 22 years old and looks 40. He has a talent for complaining that borders on artistry. His complaint about last Tuesday's salt beef was so detailed and specific that it lasted 30 minutes and left several men genuinely sad. Nathaniel Archer, whom everyone calls Arch, who is 41, and has the serene expression of a man who has decided that nothing that happens on this ship constitutes a real problem because he has seen real problems and they had French warships in them. He fought at Toulon in 1707. He mentions this occasionally but not constantly, which you appreciate. He's teaching himself to read from a Bible he keeps in his ditty bag. Samuel Reeves, 17 like you. Also pressed. He was found on the road from Bristol to Bath, which is about as inland as you can get in England, which is why he brings it up constantly as evidence of the Navy's fundamental lawlessness. I was on a road, he says at least once a week, a road with hedges on it. Mary, no, that's not right. The name on the muster roll is Michael Dowd, Irish, listed as an able seaman with 12 years' experience. By your 4th day aboard, you'd figured out that Michael Dowd is a woman. By your 6th day, you'd figured out that basically everyone in number 12 mess had figured this out and was not going to say anything, because Michael Dowd is an excellent sailor, and the alternative is reporting it to the first lieutenant and watching what happens after that. And nobody in number 12 mess is willing to do that. So Michael Dowd is Michael Dowd. Nobody talks about it. Nobody ever will. Thomas Gilmore, known as Old Tom to distinguish him from you, who is also Thomas, who is 58 years old, who's been at sea for 37 years, and whose mind has begun to drift in the night in a way that is sometimes concerning. He speaks sometimes to people who aren't there, but during the day he is fine, mostly, and his hands know everything a sailor's hands need to know. And you, Thomas Briggs, from Wareham in Dorset, pressed man, 17 years old, who wanted a job on a merchant vessel and instead got the Royal Navy. The mess cook for this week is O'Brien, which means O'Brien is the one who goes to the galley to collect your mess's burgoo, which he does with the resignation of a condemned man walking to a sentence he has already appealed and lost. He comes back with a bucket, a wooden bucket with the number 12 burned into the side. He sets it on the table. You all look at it. The bucket looks back. It's steaming, which is something. It's hot, which is something. It smells like sea above, like all the things we already discussed, like every morning since Portsmouth. Burgoo, O'Brien announces unnecessarily. Davies says nothing. Arch opens his Bible, reads for a moment, closes it. Reeves says, again. Old Tom says, bless it. O'Brien says several words in Irish that are probably not a blessing. Michael Dowd picks up a wooden spoon and starts eating without visible emotion, which is the most professional thing anyone does at the mess table. You pick up your spoon, The first mouthful is always the hardest, not the worst. After the first mouthful, your mouth has adjusted, recalibrated its expectations to somewhere in the vicinity of what it's receiving. The surprise is gone. The second mouthful is easier, the third is almost routine. By the sixth or seventh spoonful, you're not tasting it. You are simply shoveling the required calories into your body with the efficiency of a machine doing maintenance work. You are 3,800 calories a day short of what a man doing hard physical labour at sea actually needs, and your body knows this, and your body has decided that the Burgoo, whatever its qualities, contains calories and is therefore to be consumed without further debate. You eat. The ship moves around you. The guns crouch on either side. Above your head, through 2 more decks of oak and the weather deck, the wind is doing something in the sails, and the ship is responding, and somewhere above you the watch is working, and the helmsman is fighting the wheel, and the officer of the watch is staring at the horizon, doing calculations about weather and position, and what the French might be doing. But down here, it is just a bucket of grey, and 8 men eating, and the ship breathing around you. Your hands are already developing the skin of a sailor. You arrive from Wareham with the hands of a farmer's boy. Rough, yes, but rough in a different way. Rough from soil and hay and the handles of tools. That's a ground roughness. It comes from below. The sea roughness comes from above, from lines, hemp rope, tarred, twisted, thick as your thumb or as your wrist, depending on what part of the rigging you're working on. You handle these ropes all day, hauling and belaying and coiling, and the hemp and the tar work on your skin like sandpaper works on wood. Except sandpaper stops eventually. The ropes never stop. Your palms are hard now in a way they weren't 6 weeks ago. There are calluses on your fingers that weren't there before. The skin on the back of your hands is cracked in several places where the salt air got in, and 2 of those cracks bleed sometimes when you make a fist suddenly, a thin line of blood that you press shut with your thumb and ignore. Your shoulders hurt in a deep interior way that is different from the surface ache of muscles that have been worked hard. This is a joint pain, the kind that will build over years into something more serious. Davies has it in both shoulders, you've noticed. The way he moves in the morning, the careful way he reaches overhead. 30 years from now, if you're still at sea, you'll move the same way. But your body is also learning things that your mind hasn't caught up with. Your feet have learned the deck, not just the rough shape of it. Your feet know it specifically, like they know a room in a childhood home. They know the places where a plank is slightly softer, where the camber of the deck changes, where a ring bolt sits just where you'd naturally step. They adjust for the ship's movement without instructions from above. On a rough day, when the deck is tilting 10 or 15 degrees, and the landsman part of your brain is screaming about falling, your feet are already there, already compensating, already stable. You notice this sometimes in quiet moments. Your body is becoming a sailor's body, whether you ask for that or not. The morning watch, 4 to 8 in the morning, is the worst for cold. You're on the forenoon watch, 8 to noon, which at least gives the sun time to make a token effort. But before the forenoon watch there are tasks for every man on the ship, regardless of which watch you stand, and those tasks happen now, while you can still see your breath, and the deck is so cold that sitting on it makes your bones ache. The decks get scrubbed every morning. This is not optional. This is a navy that believes, with absolute theological certainty, in clean decks. Not because clean decks make the ship work better, not because the decks are visibly dirty in any way that matters to the functioning of a sailing warship, but because clean decks are the visible evidence of a crew that is properly disciplined and a captain who is properly in control. The captain of HMS Resolute can judge, by looking at the state of the deck, something about the soul of his ship. So the decks get scrubbed. The Holy Stone is a block of sandstone roughly the shape of a large Bible, which is in fact how it got its other nickname. You kneel on the wet deck and push the Holy Stone across the planking, while another man pours water in front of you. The combination of sandstone and water and effort removes the grey sea film from the wood, leaves it slightly paler, almost white in places. The sound of holy stoning is a deep, gritty scrape, repeated hundreds of times across the deck, accompanied by the slosh of water and the grunts of men working in cold air. Your knees are soaked within minutes. Your back starts to ache after 20 minutes. By 40 minutes, you're in a state beyond ache, into something that is just the ambient background noise of physical existence. The way the ship's creaking is the ambient background noise of her existence. You push the Holy Stone and don't think about your back. In 18 months, when and if you're still aboard, you will not feel this at all. You will Holy Stone the deck in the early morning with the same blank efficiency that Arch approaches everything. The body adjusts. The body always adjusts. But right now you feel it. And what you feel is cold, wet, hungry. The Burgoo is already used up somewhere in the machinery of your metabolism, already processed and insufficient, already leaving you with the specific hollow feeling of a body that is being asked for more than it's being given. "Put your back in it, Briggs," says Makepeace. Makepeace is the boatswain's mate for your section. He's 27, built like a ship's block, with a face that has been introduced to several fists over the years and shows it. He holds a rattan cane that he uses occasionally and carries always as a statement of intent. He is not a bad man exactly. He is a man doing a job in a system that requires men like him to be exactly like him. And he does the job with professionalism. You put your back in it. Now, let me tell you about the food logic of the 18th century Royal Navy, because it is both more sophisticated and more horrifying than you might expect. The victualling regulations, and there are regulations written down, very specific, somebody actually sat and wrote these, state that each sailor is entitled to a daily ration that includes, in theory, 1 pound of biscuit per day, 1 gallon of beer, 2 pounds of salt beef on beef days, or 2 pounds of salt pork with pea soup on pork days, oatmeal for Burgoo, butter and cheese on certain days, occasionally, theoretically, and fresh provisions when in port. On paper, this is not terrible. On paper, a man eating the full naval ration is consuming something like 3,000 calories a day, which is in the ballpark of what you need for the kind of work you're doing. In practice, almost none of this is what it claims to be. The biscuit is ship's biscuit, hardtack, which is flour and water baked until it is structurally comparable to fired clay. It is designed to last for months at sea. It achieves this goal. Whether it remains food in any meaningful sense after 3 months is a philosophical question that the Navy has never felt the need to resolve. The biscuit goes into your mouth. You wet it with saliva or with water if you can spare it. Your jaw works. Eventually it goes down. You have consumed a biscuit. The biscuit is also alive, not metaphorically. After the first few weeks at sea, the ship's biscuit develops weevils, small flower beetles, black, hard-bodied, about the size of an apple seed. They come from the flour. They were in the flour before it was baked, as eggs or larvae, and the baking doesn't kill everything. They hatch in the warmth of the hold. They live in the biscuit. The official advice for dealing with the weevils is to tap the biscuit on the table before eating it. This dislodges some of the live ones. The eggs and larvae stay. The sailors have a word for the larvae, bargemen. You eat the bargemen. You do not have a choice about this. You have by this point essentially stopped noticing. What you have not stopped noticing is Reeves. Reeves taps his biscuit every single morning with a kind of desperate intensity, as if enough tapping will solve the fundamental problem. 37 taps. You've counted. After 37 taps, Reeves looks at the biscuit, looks at the table where several weevils are making their confused way across the wood, and then eats the biscuit anyway. I just want to let them know, Reeves explains when you ask about the tapping, that I see them and that I'm making a choice. This seems philosophically important to Reeves. The salt beef. Oh, the salt beef. The salt beef of the 18th century Royal Navy begins as actual beef, which is salted heavily and packed into barrels and stored in the hold. The salt is the preservation mechanism. A properly salted barrel of beef in a cool hold can last, well, the regulations say it can be used for up to 2 years, though most of the men have heard stories of ships opening barrels that were older than that. The meat inside is not grey. It is not quite any colour you'd associate with food. It is salt-saturated, dense, almost wooden in texture when it comes out of the barrel, so salty that it has to be soaked in fresh water before cooking, or it would be inedible even by naval standards. Fresh water, meaning the ship's water, which has been in casks. The ship's water. A ship carries its drinking water in large oak barrels in the hold. In Portsmouth, these barrels are filled with whatever water the dockyard provides. 6 weeks later, the water has been doing what water does in a closed container, in a moving, slightly warm environment. It has gone green. Not visibly green usually, but green in the way you can smell. A faint organic undertone that tells you the water is no longer strictly speaking inert. It tastes flat and slightly wrong, and you drink it anyway because the alternative is the beer ration, and the beer ration, while technically preferable, is issued in a specific quantity, and the quantity never quite seems like enough. You soak the salt beef in this water for hours. You boil it in this water. The fat renders off into the slush tub for tomorrow's burgoo. What remains is something that is not terrible if you're hungry enough, and on HMS Resolute you're always hungry enough. The salt is drawn out of the meat during soaking mostly. The texture is soft and stringy. The flavour is nothing, mostly, with undertones of its history. You eat it. You're grateful for the protein in a way that your body communicates directly without going through your mind. The pea soup is better. The peas are dried, and dried peas store reasonably well, and Hobbs has a method for the soup that produces something genuinely warm and filling. He soaks the peas the night before. He boils them until they collapse into mush, adds whatever fat is available, adds the salt pork rind if there's rind from the day's pork issue. The result is thick and green-brown and smells like a pub on a cold evening, and on pea soup days the mood of the ship visibly improves. On pork days the morning watch comes down for their forenoon meal, and the air has the smell of something almost like a kitchen. On those days, something almost relaxes in the 340-odd bodies on HMS Resolute. Something in the evolutionary hardwiring of every man on this ship recognizes warm, fat, cooked protein and responds with a faint and irrational wave of well-being. Then the dog watch eats the last of it, and you're back to hardtack until morning. The butter and cheese, when issued, are a topic of great sensitivity among the men. The butter is salt butter, from the same victualling contracts that provide everything else. Its quality follows the same arc. The cheese is, according to the regulations, Cheshire or Suffolk, hard cheeses with good keeping qualities. It is described by the men using language that suggests they believe the regulations were written by someone who had never eaten the cheese in question. You do not eat the cheese. You ate the cheese once. That was on your 5th day aboard, when you still ate everything because you thought surely a navy that has been running for centuries must have solved the basic problem of providing food that doesn't. You ate the cheese. You do not eat the cheese anymore. You eat around the cheese. You've joined the vast majority of the Navy in a quiet, collective, unspoken agreement that the cheese is a piece of theatre and not food. What you eat instead, what you have developed, alongside every man on this ship a sort of animal gratitude for, is anything that comes from outside the system. Flying fish when they land on deck. The cook fries them in a pan with whatever fat is to hand and distributes them among whoever's on watch. They're small, not much more than a mouthful each, and the bones are a problem, and they're slightly gummy in texture. They are absolutely the best thing you have eaten since Portsmouth. Once, off the Portuguese coast, a school of dolphins followed the ship for 2 days. 2 of them beached themselves on the bowsprit netting, not intentionally, a nautical accident, and were immediately and efficiently converted into food by men who'd been at sea for 6 weeks. The dolphins tasted wrong in a specific way, too dark and too richly flavoured, almost like liver, an ocean taste that wasn't a fish taste. You ate it. You ate all of it. The Portuguese fishing boats. When the ship is close enough to shore, occasionally a Portuguese fishing boat will pull alongside and trade fresh vegetables and small fish for whatever the sailors can offer. Tobacco, a spare knife, cloth, money if they have any. The officers look the other way during these transactions because the officers understand what fresh vegetables do for scurvy, and because the officers themselves have access to the captain's stores, which include actual food in something approaching actual condition, and they are not stupid men about the difference between a crew that is healthy and a crew that is not. You traded your tobacco ration, you don't smoke, you never started, which means you have tobacco to trade, for 6 onions and a small bundle of dried fish from a Portuguese fisherman off Lisbon, and you ate those onions raw, standing on the deck in the cold evening air, biting into them like apples, and the sharpness and the moisture and the actual vegetable taste of them made your eyes water, and Reeves, watching, said, "Give me one," and ate his exactly the same way. Both of you just eating onions on the deck of a warship in the Atlantic like it was the finest meal either of you had ever had. It may have been. By week 6 it may have been. You need to talk about the water because the water is everything. A sailing warship of the 1740s carries its fresh water in wooden casks. HMS Resolute, with 347 men, and however many weeks at sea ahead of her, carries a lot of casks. The capacity of the ship's water supply determines how long she can stay at sea without putting into port. Everything else, food, ammunition, rope, sail, can be rationed, stretched, repurposed. Water is the hard constraint. Each man is supposed to receive 1 gallon of water per day for drinking and cooking. This is not a generous allowance. A gallon of water per day for a man doing hard physical labour in Well, it's cold now, but when the ship reaches the Mediterranean or the Caribbean, it will not be cold, and a gallon will feel like nothing. But that's not the present problem. The present problem is what happens to water in a cask after 5 or 6 weeks. Wood breathes. A wooden cask is porous in ways that nothing is porous in a modern world full of steel and plastic. The cask absorbs the smell of what came before it. Most of these casks previously held beer, which is fine, or vinegar, which is not fine, or salt beef, which produces an interesting interaction with the water that Hobbes describes in 2 words, and neither of them is good. The wood also grows things, organic films on the inner surface of the cask. The water interacts with these films. The result is what arrives in your drinking cup, tepid, slightly brownish in certain lights, flat, with a faint undertone that you've learned to push to the back of your attention. The boatswain issues the water ration each morning after the decks are scrubbed. He does it himself from the scuttlebutt, a large cask on deck with a hole cut in it, from which men can scoop water during the day. The scooping is done with a specific communal ladle. 347 men drink from the same ladle. The concept of germ theory is about 100 years away. Nobody has told these 347 men that sharing a ladle is spreading things. They pass the ladle and they drink. On good days, Davies has managed to collect rainwater in a spare canvas bucket during squalls. Rainwater is pure. It arrives from the sky with no cask history, no organic film, no shared ladle. It tastes clean, just clean, nothing else. A flavour so simple that your body doesn't know how to process it after weeks of the other thing. Reeves cried once drinking rainwater. He tried to hide it. Nobody mentioned it. That is a precise measurement of how things are aboard HMS Resolute. Makepeace, who you've been afraid of since your first day aboard, and who has not given you a specific reason to stop being afraid of him, calls you over on the forenoon watch, about a week out of your current position. You have been working on a line, one of the smaller running lines of the rigging, a brace for the foretopsail yard, that has a specific kind of kink in it. The kink comes from a bad coil. The line was coiled against its natural lay, the direction it was made in, and it fights you every time you try to run it. You've been struggling with it for 20 minutes. Makepeace watches for a minute, 2 minutes. You can feel him watching and it makes your hands clumsier. Stop, he says. You stop. He takes the line from your hands, his own hands, thick, completely calloused, missing a nail on the left index finger. Work the line with a confidence that looks like barely paying attention. He runs it through his hands once, twice. He finds the kink. His thumbs work at a specific spot for about 30 seconds, firm and precise, working against the lay and then with it, and the kink simply releases. The rope runs smooth. Always work with the rope, he says, handing it back, not against it. The rope wants to do something. Find out what it wants to do. Help it do that. He says this like it's obvious. It is obvious once he says it. It was not obvious before he said it. He walks away. You stand there with the rope running it through your hands, feeling for its preference, finding the direction it wants to move, working with that direction. It runs. The sail above responds, the yard shifting slightly, the canvas taking a new angle to the wind. Somewhere above, the ship acknowledges this small correct thing. That night, lying in your hammock in the dark, thinking about nothing in particular, you find yourself thinking about what Makepeace said. Always work with the rope, not against it. It seems like it might apply to things other than rope. You think about the pressed men on this ship, yourself, Reeves, the angry ones in number 17 mess who are always being punished for something. They are constantly fighting the rope, constantly working against the ship's logic, its requirements, its rhythms, and the rope kinks, and everything is harder. Davies, who was also pressed once, a long time ago, doesn't fight anything. Davies moves with the ship's logic the way water moves in a hull. He's not happy here. You don't think he is happy here, but he is competent here, and competence is a kind of peace. You don't tell anyone you're thinking about this. Men on warships don't have these kinds of conversations, but you think about it, in the dark, while the ship breathes around you, and the bilge pumps run below, and the watch on deck calls the hours. Something shifts slightly. Something in how you're holding this situation. Not acceptance, not contentment, but something more functional than pure resistance. Let me tell you about the thing nobody on this ship talks about directly, but everybody knows about, scurvy. It starts slowly. That's the thing that makes it insidious. It doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic symptom. It comes in small signs that could be anything. Your gums get slightly sore. You think it's a bad tooth. Your joints start to ache. You think it's the work. Old wounds from years ago start to hurt again. You think it's the cold. Then your gums start to bleed. Then they go soft. Then the teeth, your teeth that you've had your whole life, start to wobble, slightly at first, the way a fence post wobbles if you kick it gently. You push one with your tongue and it moves, and what you feel is the wrongness of that, the fundamental physiological wrongness of a tooth moving when it should not. The ship's surgeon on HMS Resolute is a man named Dr. William Grover, who received his medical education at Edinburgh, who has read the work of certain naval surgeons on the subject of scurvy, who believes in a connection between diet and the disease, though the specific mechanism is not yet understood. He knows what works. He doesn't know why it works. He keeps lemon juice, a small supply, carefully preserved in sealed bottles, issued to any man who shows early signs. He pushes to get fresh provisions whenever the ship is in port. He argues with the purser about the vegetable supply. The purser controls the provisions. The purser is a man named Calvert, who is not evil exactly, but who is operating within a system that rewards him for returning unspent provisions at the end of a voyage, which means the incentive structure of his position is directly opposed to the health of the men. Every bottle of preserved lemon juice he doesn't issue, every vegetable he doesn't buy, represents money he keeps. The system was designed by someone who didn't think about it very carefully, or who thought about it and didn't care, which amounts to the same thing in terms of outcomes. Grover and Calvert argue about this regularly. The arguments happen in the captain's presence sometimes, which gives them a certain formal quality, but the underlying tension is constant. 4 men in your crew have mild scurvy symptoms. 3 of them are responding to the lemon juice. 1 of them is being stubborn about taking anything from the surgeon, because he has a specific distrust of surgeons dating from an experience in Bristol that he won't describe in detail. Arch is the one who brings the reluctant man his lemon juice every day, folded into a piece of biscuit. Arch doesn't explain or convince or argue. He just appears with the biscuit and waits until it's eaten. This has been happening for 2 weeks. How do you know he'll take it? You ask Arch once. Because he's hungry, Arch says. Man's hungry enough, he'll take anything. You're learning a lot about hunger on this ship, about what it does to choices, about how the horizon of what you'll accept shifts when the body is making the decisions rather than the mind. The night watches are 4 hours on, 4 hours off, rotating through the crew. You stand the middle watch, midnight to 4, which is the one that disrupts sleep most thoroughly because you can't get into any kind of rhythm. You sleep, you wake at midnight, you work for 4 hours in the dark and the cold, you sleep again, and then the morning watch wakes you for Burgoo, and the day begins. The middle watch is the quietest time on the ship. The captain is asleep. Most of the officers are asleep. The lieutenant of the watch stands the quarterdeck and stares at the compass and the sails and thinks about whatever lieutenants think about at 2 a.m. The helmsman wrestles the wheel. Everyone else is trying to stay awake while appearing to be awake. You've been given the starboard bow lookout, which means you stand at the very front of the ship on the right side, holding a line for balance when the ship pitches, watching the darkness ahead. There is a specific technique to night watch lookout that Davies taught you on your second week. Don't look directly at what you're trying to see. The human eye has 2 kinds of receptors. The cones in the centre of the eye, which see colour and detail in good light. The rods, which ring the outer part of the vision, which are far more sensitive in darkness. You do not look directly at a suspicious shape in the darkness. You look slightly to one side of it, let it fall on your rods, and what was invisible becomes visible. Davies called this looking away to sea. He learned it from an old sailor who learned it from an older one, and so on back, probably, to the first man who tried to navigate at night. Standing at the bow in the dark, looking slightly away from the darkness ahead, you can see stars. So many stars that Wareham never showed you. In Wareham, you had a sky with stars in it. Here, the sky is made of stars, edge to edge, the Milky Way not a band but a texture, the whole vault alive with light so old it left its source before your grandparents were born. The phosphorescence in the bow wave, the ship pushing through, the water creates a disturbance that triggers the bioluminescent plankton, and the wave ahead glows. Blue-green light, cold light, flowing back along the hull as the ship passes through it. On calm nights, when the sea is dark and the sky's full of stars and the bow wave is glowing, you can feel something that is not related to Burgoo or salt beef, or the weight of your wet shoes, or the ache in your knees. You can feel the size of the world. You stand at the front of a ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in 1743, and every direction you look there is water and sky and nothing else. And the vastness of it is not terrifying in this moment, it is clarifying. In Wareham the world was a village and some fields and a road that went to Poole. Here the world is everything all at once, and you're a small point in it, and somehow that is all right. Arch appears beside you, moving silently, which Arch does. He's not on watch. He sometimes walks the deck at night when he can't sleep. Looking away to sea, he asks. Yes. Good. A pause. He looks at the stars. I learned to read, he says, by looking at it the same way. You look straight at the letters, they don't make sense. You sort of look at the shape of the whole thing. Eventually it comes. How long? Took me 2 years. Another pause. Worth it, he says. He goes back to the main deck. You stand at the bow in the dark, watching the glowing water, thinking about looking away to sea, and you write no letters because you have nobody to write to except your mother, and no way to send them even if you did. So you write them in your head, describing the phosphorescence, the stars, the feeling of the ship alive under your feet, and you know she'll never hear any of it, but you write it anyway. On your 48th day out of Portsmouth, the weather changes. You feel it before you see it. That's the thing about weather at sea. Your body knows before your eyes do. The barometric pressure drops and something in your inner ear responds to it. A faint unease, an animal awareness that the world is about to become less cooperative. The swell changes. The Atlantic swells have been long and rolling, coming from the northwest, which means you're in the tail end of a pattern, from somewhere far up in the North Atlantic. The new swell is shorter and from a different direction, from the southwest, which means the pattern is changing. The clouds on the western horizon, which were white in the morning, are dark by afternoon. Not the soft grey of English overcast, something darker and more purposeful. Makepeace goes forward to the foredeck, looks at the clouds for a long time, looks at the swell, looks at the set of the topsails. Blow coming, he says, to nobody, to the sky. The boatswain, Mr. Patterson, who's the third most important man on this ship after the captain and first lieutenant, and who's responsible for every piece of rope and wooden canvas that keeps the ship in the air. Mr. Patterson comes forward and stands next to Makepeace and looks at the same things. He does not say anything. He turns and walks aft to where the first lieutenant is standing. Within 20 minutes, the order comes. Take in the topgallants. This means the very top sails, the highest and therefore most affected by wind, come in. The ship reduces her sail area before the weather arrives, not during. This is not timidity. This is the difference between seamanship and emergency. You reduce while you can still do it in an orderly way, while the men are not terrified and the ropes are not fighting you and the ship is not already in motion. You go aloft. 43 days ago, the thought of going aloft, climbing the rigging of a sailing warship, up the ratlines to the tops, then up the shrouds above to the topgallant yard, was something your body refused to fully accept as a thing that would happen to you. You climbed the first time because the alternative was being beaten, and you climbed with your eyes closed for the first 20 feet, and then you looked, and then you nearly fell, which would have solved the problem permanently but in the wrong direction. Now you climb without thinking about it. Your hands know the sequence of holds, your feet know the ratlines, how much they give under your weight, how to trust them. You go up with Callum and 2 others, spread out across the rigging, the wind already building, and you work the topgallant. Getting a sail in is not just dropping. You have to go out on the yard of the horizontal spar at the top and gather the canvas by hand, pulling it up and securing it, lying along the yard with your stomach on the wood and your legs dangling 70 feet above the deck, which is 80 feet above the sea, working with cold hands on stiff canvas that the wind is trying to take back from you. The wind is already 15 knots and building. Callum, 3 feet to your left, is swearing continuously in Irish. Not from fear, you've learned. This is how Callum concentrates. The swearing is the sound of his brain working. The canvas fights. Canvas is heavy. A topgallant sail on a 74 weighs hundreds of pounds. And it's stiff with salt and cold. And it does not want to be gathered. You pull against it, and it pulls back. And somewhere in your body the burgoo and the hardtack and the salt beef are being converted to the immediate energy needed to overpower several 100 pounds of wet canvas. And there is not quite enough energy, and you pull anyway. The yard beneath you is about 2 feet in diameter. You are lying on it. The ship moves, which means the yard moves, which means you move, and the motion of a yard 70 feet up when the ship pitches is a much larger motion than the same pitch feels on deck. You hold the foot rope with your feet and try not to think about the mathematics of how long you would fall if you let go. You don't let go. The sail comes in. You pass the gaskets, the small lines that tie the gathered sail to the yard, and your fingers work the knots from pure muscle memory, each turn the same as the 300 turns before it, the rope familiar as an old conversation. By the time you come back down, the wind has built to 20 knots. By supper time, it's 30. The storm arrives at 3 in the morning of the 49th day. You know it's coming because the ship tells you. The ship's voice changes. The creak of the timbers goes from the conversational background noise of a healthy vessel to something urgent and variable, the hull speaking its stress. The motion changes. The slow pitch and roll of open ocean sailing becomes something more erratic, sharper in the short axis, the ship beginning to fight rather than cooperate with the water beneath her. You are awake before the call comes. Everyone who has been at sea long enough is awake. The body knows. When the call does come, all hands on deck. There's almost no scrambling. The men come up from below in a flow, not a panic. Panic is for landsmen. The sailors move with the specific urgency of people who have things to do and are going to do them. On deck, the world has become something different. The waves are... You don't have a good reference for this. You've seen the sea from shore, seen big seas off the Dorset coast in winter, impressive from the cliff, from inside a wave, from a ship's deck at night with rain horizontal and wind that requires you to brace your full weight against it just to stand upright. This is not the same thing as watching from a cliff. The waves are running 20 feet now, not breaking yet, not fully breaking, but crested with white that the wind tears into spray. The deck of HMS Resolute is awash intermittently. A wave breaks against the hull. The water comes over the rail. Your knees are suddenly in cold seawater that drains through the scuppers while you hold whatever line is to hand. The cold of the water is specific. It's not just cold. It's Atlantic cold, deep ocean cold, cold that has been cold since a long way north and got colder on the way south, and when it hits your legs it has an immediate effect on your attention. Nothing else matters. The cold is a fact, and you are in it, and you deal with it. The first lieutenant is on deck. The captain appears at the quarterdeck hatch. He says something to the first lieutenant that you can't hear over the wind. There is more sail to come in. The fore topsail is the problem. It's been reduced to the reefed configuration, a quarter of its normal area, but the wind is increasing, and the reefed topsail is still more canvas than the ship can safely carry, and the yard is taking a strain that Mr. Patterson doesn't like, and the order comes. The fore topsail has to come in completely. Davies looks at the foremast rigging. He looks at the wind, which is now shrieking. Not the word exactly, but the sound it makes in the rigging is a register that is physiologically unnerving, a frequency that the human nervous system reads as emergency. He looks at Makepeace. Makepeace looks at the sea ahead. "Briggs," he says, "O'Brien, Callum, Reeves, Davies, go." You go. The forecastle is awash every third wave. You make it to the foremast and start up the ratlines, and the difference between going up the rigging in normal conditions and going up the rigging in 35 knots of Atlantic gale at 3 in the morning is every difference there is. The rigging is moving in ways it doesn't normally move. The shrouds are vibrating, a deep harmonic hum you feel in your palms. The ratlines, normally taut and reliable, are jumping with each gust, trying to throw your feet off. You climb with everything you have. There is a moment about 40 feet up when the ship rolls to starboard, and your side of the rigging, the starboard side, comes up toward the vertical and then keeps going, and for a moment you're hanging from the ratlines instead of climbing them, the deck not below you but to one side, the sea and the dark sky trading places as the ship goes over and comes back, The ship comes back. You're still on the rigging. 40 feet up in a gale in the dark, and you're still on the rigging, and your hands did not open, and you are not fine, not at all fine. Your heart is doing something complicated, and your legs are less steady than they were. But you are still there. Davies above you says something. You can't hear it over the wind, but his hands make a gesture. Keep moving. You keep moving. The topsail yard at the top is where it gets specific. The yard is thrashing. Not like it does in normal weather, where it swings through a manageable arc. In this wind, the sail still attached to it is driving forces through the wood that travel down into your body through your feet and your grip. You feel the load in your chest, in your teeth. The canvas you're supposed to gather is trying to become a thing that kills you. It drives against you in the gusts, catches wind under it and lifts, and you hold on with one arm around the yard and the other hauling the canvas in, and your hands are no longer really hands, they're tools, cold and far away and working on their own. O'Brien is to your right, and through the rain and the dark you can see his mouth moving, and you know he's swearing, and somehow this is steadying. The continuity of O'Brien swearing through all conditions. The sail comes in, gasket by gasket, foot by foot. The yard stops fighting. The ship feels different under you immediately. Less strain in the mast, less vibration. The load that was driving through the rigging decreases. You come back down. At the bottom of the ratlines, the deck lurches as a large wave comes aboard, and you go to your knees in cold water and hold the ratlines until it passes. The water is around your waist for a moment, genuinely around your waist, the deck entirely submerged, a weight of Atlantic pressing against you and trying to take you with it as it pours off. And then the deck comes back up and you're on it and coughing, and Reeves is next to you and Callum is holding a staying line and everyone is accounted for. Davies is last down the ratlines. He comes down with the unhurried competence of someone doing a thing they've done 1,000 times, which he has. He reaches the deck, looks at you. "Still got all your fingers?" he asks. You check. You have all your fingers. They don't feel like fingers. They feel like gravel in skin tubes. But they're there. "Yes," you say. "Good." He moves forward to help with something else. The storm lasts until dawn. Not the full storm, the worst of it, the 35-knot part with the water on the decks, that passes by 4 a.m. But the sea takes longer to settle than the wind does. The waves run long after the wind that made them has passed on, and the ship moves in a troubled, inconsistent way, the sea not sure what it wants to do, sending competing swells from different directions that make the ship corkscrew unpleasantly. By dawn, the wind is down to 15 knots and the sky is showing the grey promise of light. You have been awake for, you don't know how long. You've lost the counting. Your bones know it's a long time. Your knees, which spent part of the night wet and cold, are stiff. Your shoulders are something specific and particular, and not something you want to think about. Makepeace finds you on the foredeck, sitting on a coil of rope, not sleeping but not quite awake. "Good work last night," he says. He walks away before you can respond. You sit with that for a moment. This is the highest praise the Navy offers. 2 words. Good work. Said by a man who would have said it to 100 men 100 times at sea, and who says it now, and who means it, and who has already gone to say it to the next man. Good work. Your hands in your lap look different to you. The calluses, the cracked skin, the specific muscle development in the forearms and across the back of the hand. You have sailor's hands now. Not farmers' hands, not the hands of a boy from Wareham who wanted a job on a merchant vessel. Something different, something that was built here, in the Atlantic, in the rigging, in the cold and the dark and the weight of wet canvas. You think about the forge, how metal is made harder, how pressure and heat and repeated working changes what something is, not just how it looks. You do not feel stronger exactly. You feel shaped, like something that has been through the process of being shaped. The dawn comes up over a calmer sea. The sky is washed clean by the storm. The horizon is clear and crisp and endless in every direction. Somewhere under those other horizons, France is doing whatever France is doing. Portugal is full of its own lives. Wareham is full of Wareham, which now seems like a story about someone else's life. And here is the ship. Here is the deck, which is wet and cold and clean after the night's washing. Here are 340-odd men dealing with what they're dealing with, each in their way. And here is you. Hobbs makes Burgoo after the storm. He makes it with exactly the same indifference he brings to making it every other morning. The same paddle, the same tub of slush, the same grey water from the casks, the same mouldy oatmeal from the hold. But after a night in the rigging in a gale, after the cold and the wet and the fear that was not exactly fear but was something in the same family, after the work and the strain and the specific emptiness that comes from expending every physical resource you have, after all of that, the Burgoo is something different. Not in the bowl. The bowl is the same. The smell is the same. The colour is exactly the colour it always is. But inside you, something has shifted in what you're asking of it. You sit at the mess table in number 12, and O'Brien sets the bucket down, and everyone looks at it, and nobody says anything. No commentary, no again, no 37 taps. You eat. The Burgoo is hot, and the hot is the most important thing, because hot means warmth, and warmth means something fundamental is working. Your body pulls the heat out of it and uses it immediately, some primitive caloric negotiation happening below conscious thought. Reeves, next to you, eats with his head down and says nothing. Arch reads 3 sentences of his Bible, and then closes it and eats. Michael Dowd eats quickly, efficiently, the same as always, but something in the set of her shoulders is different this morning. Softer, the post-storm release. Old Tom says, "Glad to be alive." Nobody argues with that. "The biscuit's hard," Davies says finally. He taps it on the table once, not 37 times. Once. A professional single tap which dislodges 2 weevils. "Always is," he says, and eats it. And you eat yours. The first time you see the Mediterranean coast, you don't quite believe it. You've been at sea for 4 months. You've learnt the Atlantic grey, the Atlantic green, the specific colours of northern water in every weather. The sea is a thing you know now, in the way you know the back of your hand. Not because it's simple, but because it's familiar. The Mediterranean is the wrong colour. That's the only way to describe the first sight of it. It is the wrong colour for the sea. It is blue, not grey blue or green blue, or the blue that English sky gets sometimes in summer. It is blue the way a painter paints the sea when he wants the painting to look beautiful. Blue that seems to generate its own light. Blue that goes down and down, and you can see the bottom in the shallows, and the bottom is golden, and there are shapes in it that are not English shapes. The coast of Portugal was familiar enough. Green hills, grey rock, something that rhymed with England distantly. This does not rhyme with England. The land is ochre and white. The light is different, harder, denser, no English softness to it. Even the shadows are different, more decisive, edges that are edges rather than the gentle blurring of an overcast day. You're in the Mediterranean because that's where the French are, approximately. An HMS Resolute is here because the Admiral decided she should be, and the Admiral's decisions are not things you have any input into or information about beyond the basic fact of ending up wherever they result in. The food changes. In port at Lisbon, the purser bought onions. Real onions, whole bags of them, enough for the whole ship. He bought them because Grover threatened to write directly to the Admiralty about scurvy, and the letter would have made the purser look responsible. And the purser is, above all things, a man of self-preservation. So, onions. The onions go into everything. They go into the pea soup, which makes the pea soup genuinely good. They go into a kind of stew that Hobbs makes with the salt beef soaked properly, cut small, cooked with onion and dried herbs from a jar he's been rationing all voyage. That produces something that smells like a kitchen, like a real kitchen, like a place where food is made for people, rather than fuel is produced for machines. The first time you eat that stew, you put down your spoon halfway through because something unexpected happens in your chest, a kind of tightening that takes you a moment to identify. It's homesickness, not for Wareham specifically, for the feeling of eating food that was made for you, that someone cared about making. Your mother's kitchen, the way it smelled, the way food was an act of making something as well as a thing you ate. You finish the stew, you don't mention the feeling to anyone. That's not a thing that gets mentioned. But Hobbs, the next morning, gives you a double issue of the stew for your mess, and when he hands it to O'Brien, he says without looking up, "Tell your boy it's better when they simmer it slow." He means you. You were the one who asked him once, weeks ago, how long he cooked the salt beef before adding the onion. He remembered. There is a warmth in being remembered. There is, even here, even in this reduced and functional world, the possibility of being seen. Let me step back for a moment, because I've been talking about Burgoo and weevils and wet shoes and the cold water in your lungs, and all of that is true, and none of that is the complete story. The 18th century Royal Navy is terrible in ways I've been describing. The conditions are brutal, the food is genuinely awful, the hierarchy is absolute and sometimes arbitrary, and the punishment for disobedience is violent and public, and the possibility of being pressed, taken from your life and put on a ship without your consent, is a constant fact of existence for any man living near the English coast. All of that is real, but the Navy is also, and this is the complicated part, one of the most technically sophisticated organisations in the world. A 74-gun ship of the line is the most complex machine that the 18th century builds. More complex than a clock, more complex than a mill. It has hundreds of individual moving parts, each one with a specific name and function, each one maintained by men who specialise in exactly that part. The sailmaker knows canvas, the gunner knows powder and shot, the carpenter knows wood and caulking, and the specific places in the hull where stress concentrates. The surgeon knows the body, the knowledge required to sail a warship in the 1740s, navigate her accurately across oceans, fight her effectively against an enemy, keep her crew alive long enough to do any of this. That knowledge is distributed across several hundred human beings, each of whom carries their piece of it, and the ship is the sum of all of it. You are learning your piece, not just which knots to tie and which lines to run. You are learning the logic of it, the why underneath the what. You are learning to look at a sail configuration and see what it means in terms of speed and stability. You are learning the relationship between wind angle and boat speed, why sailing into the wind is a problem, and how you solve it by zigzagging. Davies teaches you the most. Not formally, Davies doesn't do formal, but you've started following him when he works, and he doesn't tell you to stop, and you watch his hands and the reasoning behind what they do, and sometimes you ask and sometimes you don't, and slowly the knowledge builds. Arch teaches you to read, not formally either, but he shows you the Bible passages he's working on, and when you hesitate on a word he says it and moves on, never making it a lesson, never suggesting its instruction, just two people looking at words together. By the time you're in the Mediterranean, you can read a posting notice on the ship's board. By the time you're 6 months in, you can read anything on the ship. Old Tom teaches you the sky. His mind wanders at night, loses the thread of now, but the celestial navigation he learned 30 years ago is still in him, stored somewhere below the confusion, and when he talks about the stars, he is clear and specific and ancient in the way people are ancient when they know something completely. The stars don't change, he tells you, on a clear night, pointing at Orion. Everything else changes, the sea changes, the ship changes, the men change. He puts his hand on your shoulder gently. You'll change. He looks at the constellation. The stars don't. This turns out to be true and not entirely true at the same time, because the stars do change very slowly, over thousands of years, the whole picture rotating as the Earth wobbles on its axis. But old Tom doesn't know that, and what he's trying to say is still true, that there are things that can be depended on, constants in a world of variables. And finding those constants and orienting yourself to them is the difference between being lost and being found. You think about that for a long time. You encounter a French ship off Toulon in your 5th month. Not a fight. Not exactly. A chase and a conversation. The kind of conversation that happens between warships, which is mostly about showing what you have, and whether what you have is sufficient reason for the other party to reconsider their current course of action. The French ship is a 64-gun ship, smaller than Resolute, which means she can run faster and is doing so. You chase her for 4 hours in a rising wind, and she keeps pulling away, and eventually the captain makes a calculation about the changing weather and the distance to the nearest friendly port and decides the chase is over. But for those 4 hours the ship is fully awake in a way she isn't otherwise. The guns are cleared for action. The gun ports open. The guns run out. The gun crews at their stations. The lower gun deck, your gun deck, transforms in about 9 minutes from its normal incarnation as sleeping quarters and eating space and navigational thoroughfare into what it was built to be. The guns naked on their carriages, the cartridges ready, the slow match burning in the tubs. The smell of a cleared-for-action gun deck is specific and remarkable. Black powder, even not yet fired. The tallow of the gun wheels, the sweat of men who are afraid but experienced and therefore functional. The seawater that was thrown on the deck to prevent fire. You're at number 4 gun, starboard side. It takes 7 men to work an 18-pounder effectively. You're the 3rd sponger, the man who runs the wet sponge down the barrel between shots to extinguish any burning fragments before the next charge goes in. If you don't do this properly when the cartridge goes in, it explodes in the man holding it, and the man loading it, and everyone near the gun. You know this. Your hands have practiced the sequence 100 times in drill. Run the sponge in, rotate, pull out, clear for load. Do this properly every time. Do not hesitate. In drill, it takes about a minute of the whole sequence, load to fire to sponge to reload. In an actual fight, everything speeds up and also slows down in a way that doesn't make logical sense, as though time itself is doing something complicated under pressure. The French ship runs. The chase ends. The guns are withdrawn. The ports closed. The gun deck begins reassembling itself back into daily life. The cartridges go back to the magazine. The slow match goes out. The sponges drip on the deck. Nobody talks much. Reeves, at the gun next to yours, is very pale. "Glad they ran," he says. "Yes," you say. "You're very glad they ran." To your mother, somewhere in your 5th month at sea. The sea is not what I expected. I thought it would be like the sea from the Dorset cliffs, which is enormous and grey and dramatic, but which stays where it's supposed to stay. From inside it, everything is different. The horizon moves. You never see land. The water is sometimes blue and sometimes black and sometimes green, and it is never still. Even on calm days it breathes, and you feel the breath in your feet through the deck. The food is worse than I will tell you directly. I am healthy. I am eating. I will not describe the eating in detail because I think you would worry more than is useful, and also because some of the details would require more words than I currently have in my vocabulary for expressing disgust. I have learned to tie 17 different knots. I have learned to read the weather in the clouds and the swell and the colour of the water near the horizon. I have learned to go aloft in weather that 6 months ago would have struck me as impossible. I have learned that hunger does not kill you, that cold does not kill you, that fear is a tool if you use it properly and an enemy if you don't, that a ship full of men in difficult conditions mostly manages to be human to each other, mostly because the alternative is living inside a machine, and no man actually wants that. I am not happy here. I am not unhappy in the way I was the first week. I am something in between that doesn't have a name, something functional and alive and alert to the world in a way I wasn't before. The stars here are different, bigger. The sky is bigger. Everything is bigger out here. I am bigger too, I think. Thomas. There is a specific hour in the Mediterranean, in summer, in the late afternoon, when the light does something to the water that cannot be described accurately. It is the light that painters came to the Mediterranean for. The light that the word luminous was invented to describe. It hits the surface of the sea at the angle that makes the blue go deeper, and the foam go whiter, and the whole thing look less like a physical object and more like a painting of what the world should look like if the world were trying. You are on deck in this light, on watch, doing nothing specific, checking a line, running your hands along it for wear the way you do routinely now, checking everything routinely, the maintenance of everything a constant background task, and the light is happening all around you. Davies is near the bow, also doing something routine. He stops, looks at the light on the water. He says nothing. He looks for maybe 10 seconds, then he goes back to what he was doing. But in those 10 seconds you saw something in his face. Not sentiment exactly, not the word for it, just a face, weathered and closed and professional, opening slightly, a door ajar, a window cracked, to let in the fact of the beauty. Then closing again, but you saw it. 15 years at sea, and the light still gets in. That seems important. That seems like the most important thing you've learned on this ship. The thing underneath all the practical knowledge. the thing that can't be taught with a demonstration or a rope or a bucket of grey food. You can learn to navigate by stars without stopping to see the stars. You can learn to read the sea without seeing the sea. The knowledge and the experience are not the same thing, and the experience is the reason for the knowledge. And when Davies stopped and looked at the light, he was doing something that all the charts and all the regulations and all the hierarchy of the Royal Navy cannot measure. That is not in any victualling contract, that costs nothing and weighs nothing and keeps something alive in a man that the sea and the navy and the Burgoo and the weevils and the cold and the dark and the endless and the lonely and the difficult, all the things that press down on this life that cannot touch. He looked at the light, and it was enough. We are going to compress time now. This is how sleep stories work. This is how they have to work, because life doesn't fit in a single night, and neither does a naval voyage, and we are coming slowly toward the place where you can rest. 6 months at sea, then 7. The ship is in the Mediterranean, then back toward Gibraltar, then, eventually, the long Atlantic crossing back toward England. The food does not improve. The Burgoo is always Burgoo. The hardtack is always hardtack. The weevils are always present, and Reeves still taps his biscuit, though he's reduced it to a single decisive tap, a concession to realism. But something in the ship is different after the storm, after the chase, after the months of daily proximity and shared difficulty. The 347 men have become not a community, exactly, not a family, something more functional and less sentimental, a working thing, a machine with human parts that have worn into each other, accommodated each other's shapes, found the configurations that work. You know who to ask when a knot needs to be right the first time. You know who can fix a sail in the dark by touch alone. You know who to wake up when the bilge pumps sound wrong, who can diagnose a problem in the rig from 50 feet away, who to avoid on the morning after the grog ration runs heavy. You know the ship, not all of it. That would take a lifetime, and you know now that there are men on this ship who have given their lifetimes to it and still don't know all of it. But your piece, your bit of the vast distributed knowledge, your role in the machine. On the 41st day of the return voyage, Makepeace assigns you as lead in hand for the mid-watch foretop. This means you are responsible for a section. You make decisions about your section. You answer for your section. You are 17 years old. You've been at sea for 8 months. You are a sailor. The English coast on a grey November morning is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen. You don't expect it to be. You expected relief, which you feel. You expected the practical thoughts about food and warmth and dry shoes, which are there. You expected the calculation of what comes next. You did not expect beauty. But the grey English sky, the specific grey that is not dramatic and not luminous, and not the wrong colour for anything, just exactly the grey that English sky is supposed to be, the grey of your entire previous life. That grey is beautiful to you now. The green of the hills near Portsmouth, emerging from the November haze, the way the sea changes colour as it shallows toward shore, the deep blue of the Atlantic giving way to green, and then to the grey-brown of English tidal water, the smell of land. You've forgotten about the smell of land. 8 months at sea, and the smell of land has gone from background to absent, and your nose has recalibrated to the ship. The smell of grass and soil, and the specific vegetable smell of a November English field, when it arrives, Something in your chest does something complex and involuntary. On the quarterdeck, even the first lieutenant, who is not a man who demonstrates anything publicly, looks toward the coast for a long moment. HMS Resolute comes into Portsmouth under shortened sail, making her way carefully through the shipping that crowds the anchorage. You're on deck, at your station, doing your job. Your hands work the lines they're supposed to work. Your feet are steady on the familiar planking. The anchor goes down with a tremendous rattle of chain. The ship stops. For the first time in 8 months, the deck is still under your feet. Completely still. This is wrong. Your body, which has spent 8 months learning to compensate for the motion, doesn't know what to do with the absence of it. You sway slightly, finding balance in a motion that isn't there. The deck that doesn't move feels like it's moving. Davies next to you laughs. A short, genuine laugh, the best laugh you've heard him produce. Sea legs, he says, takes a few days to lose them. Does it come back, you ask, when you go out again? Faster every time. He looks at the Portsmouth waterfront. Nothing takes as long to learn the second time. He goes below. You stand on the still deck and look at England. Portsmouth is grey and cold and smells like a port city. Fish and coal smoke and the sewage that goes straight into the harbour, and the specific maritime smell of tar and hemp and salt-soaked timber. It is not clean. It is not beautiful in the way the Mediterranean light was beautiful. But it is here. It is solid. It is land. In your coat pocket you have 4 months' pay. Not your full entitlement. The Navy being creative with the definition of pay due, but something. Enough for a meal that is not Burgoo. Enough for a bed that is not a hammock. Enough for a message to Wareham. A letter that will take a week to arrive and tell your mother that you are alive and in Portsmouth and will get home when the Navy allows it, which may be never, depending on whether they press you again before you make it off the docks. You have learned from the men how to get off the docks without being pressed. There are specific routes, specific times, specific arrangements. The knowledge has been passed. Down through generations of pressed men, the exact geography of freedom in Portsmouth. You have it. You will use it. But not yet. Right now, you stand on the deck of HMS Resolute, and you let yourself be still. Let me tell you what I actually think happened in those 8 months. Not the official version, not the story the Navy would tell about discipline and seamanship, and the production of good English sailors. The other version. The Burgoo was terrible. I want to be clear about that. It was always terrible. In 300 years it has not retroactively become acceptable. The weevils in the biscuit, the rancid fat, the moldy oatmeal, the sailors' names for it that can't be printed, none of that was fine. Then or now. But eating the Burgoo, day after day, was a kind of practice in deciding what you actually need. Because what you need, at base, is calories. You need the fuel to do the work. Everything else, the taste, the texture, the pleasure of a good meal, the comfort of food made by someone who cares. Those are real needs, genuine human needs, but they are not the requirement for the engine to run. And when the engine needs to run, when the yard needs to be cleared in a gale at 3 a.m, and your hands are cold and the canvas is fighting you, in that moment the calories are what matter, and the Burgoo provided the calories. This is a very reduced way of thinking about food. I am not recommending it. I am not suggesting that reducing food to calories is good philosophy or good living. Human beings need to be fed in a way that is also feeding in the full sense. But learning the difference, knowing which is which, in a specific crisis moment, knowing that you can operate on minimum provision and still do what needs to be done, that knowledge is not nothing. The men who came apart on HMS Resolute, the ones who found the conditions impossible, who couldn't eat the food or bear the work or function in the hierarchy, those men didn't lack courage. They lacked whatever it is that lets you look at the Burgoo and decide, this is what there is, and I will use it. Make peace. Who showed you how to work with a rope rather than against it. Davies, who looked at the light on the Mediterranean and let it in. Old Tom, who navigated by stars that don't change. Arch, who found God in a Bible and read it letter by letter, tooth by tooth, building meaning out of marks on paper. Michael Dowd, who survived a system designed to destroy her by being perfectly, functionally, unflinchingly excellent. These were not happy people. This was not a happy situation. Nothing in this story is being rounded up to comfortable. But these were people who kept going, who found the thing that was useful in the situation they were in, who remained human in a place that tried, not maliciously but systematically, to reduce them to something less. The Burgoo was the test. Every morning the test arrived in a wooden bucket that smelled like everything the sea had done to the food supply, and every morning the men of Number 12 Mess sat down and took the test, and passed it by the basic act of eating it and getting up and going to work. You passed the test. 43 days, 8 months, the weevils, the storm, the French ship, the light on the water. You passed. It's quiet now. You're back in England, or you're still on the ship, or you're somewhere between the two, in the space that stories occupy when they're working properly, the space that isn't quite historical and isn't quite now, but is both at once. Wherever you are, you're lying down. Something below you that is not a canvas hammock swinging 14 inches from the next canvas hammock is softer than you've known in 8 months. Your body, which has been worked and cold and wet and hungry and pushed past its own objections over and over, is deciding that now, finally, it can stop, not permanently, temporarily, in the way the ship stopped in Portsmouth, just still. The sounds around you are changing, the sea sounds, the ones you've been carrying for 8 months, that have been the background of every moment of every day, are fading now, or not fading, getting quieter, going from foreground to background to something more like a memory. The bilge pump clanks somewhere very far away. The rigging hums in a wind you are no longer climbing. The Atlantic moves, enormous and cold and indifferent, somewhere that is not here. Here is warm, here is still. Your hands, which know every knot and every line, and the specific weight of wet canvas, and the feel of a tarred rope in the dark. Your hands are resting now. The calluses are there. The cracks are there. The knowledge is there, stored in the muscle and the bone, but the hands are still. Thomas Briggs, from Wareham in Dorset, 17 years old. Sailor. You ate the Burgoo. Every morning for 8 months you ate the terrible food, and did the difficult work and slept in the too small hammock and woke up again and did it all again. You learned the rope. You looked at the light. You held on in the dark. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all. Centuries will pass. The Royal Navy, you know, will change beyond recognition. The wooden ships will give way to iron ships, and iron ships to steel ships, and steam will replace sail, and GPS will replace old Tom stars, and the hammocks will become bunks, and the Burgoo will become... something technically better and probably still not very good, because the Navy has never in its history been known primarily for its food. The weevils will eventually go. The rancid fat will be replaced with something else. The 14-inch hammock allowance will increase, but men and women will still go to sea, will still climb into the dark and the cold and the difficult, still push their bodies past the objection, still find in the immensity of the ocean something that cannot be found anywhere on land. That particular combination of scale and loneliness and beauty and danger that makes the sea and not just a lot of water. They'll still feel the ship move under them. They'll still watch the stars from the night watch. They'll still eat in the company of people they didn't choose, and find in that compulsory companionship something that approaches, not love exactly, but the functional warmth of people who have survived difficult things together, who have shared the particular intimacy of a wooden bucket of grey food in the dark. Some things don't change. The way a body learns what it needs, the way the light still gets in, the way a person can be shaped by difficulty into something harder and more capable, and if they're fortunate, if they pay attention, if the arch and the Davies and the makepiece of their particular experience manage to communicate the right things, something more alive to the world, not less. The sounds are almost gone now, just the underlying rhythm of things, the ship breathing, the pump in the bilge steady as a heartbeat, the ocean outside the hull, pressing, always pressing, and the hull holding against it. Tomorrow there will be more work. There always is, but that's tomorrow. Right now there is just this. The warmth is enough. The quiet is enough. The stillness after motion is enough. You've earned it. Every cold morning, every grey bowl, every line hauled in the dark, every hour on the night watch looking at the stars from slightly to the side. You've earned it. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way the sea takes a long Atlantic swell, gradually and completely and all the way down. Let the cold go. Let the hunger go. Let the motion that your body still expects but doesn't need. Let that go. Your hands can rest now. The watch is stood by someone else. The pump is running and the hull is holding and the stars are doing what they always do and the ship knows what she's doing. You don't need to hold anything. Let go. The grey before dawn is just the grey before dawn. Not Burgoo. Not the smell of the lower gun deck. Not the boatswain's mate with his rattan. Just the light coming. Just the ordinary miracle of another day. The same as today. The same as yesterday. The same as all the mornings stretching back through the centuries to every person who ever watched the dark become light and thought, still here, still here. The water always outside the hull always holding, still here, good night.